Hello, hello. Today inside of Flash we will be illustrating a cartoon character. So go ahead and open up Flash and click on a new ActionScript 3 project. And we will go up to File, Import, and choose Import to Library. This will allow us to import a reference image. I went ahead and found a reference image online, and I would encourage you to do the same. Now, after selecting the image in the import dialog, it placed the image in my library. And my library, if your screen is like mine, can be located over here, the little tab that says Library. If you can't find it, you can go up to Window and choose Library right there. Shortcut Control or Command L. I just hid my library, so let me pull that back up real quick. And voila. So I'm going to grab the reference image that is now in the library and pull it out onto my canvas, and it is a large image, and that's okay. So here we have Homer Simpson, and today I will just be focusing on drawing his head. Okay, so when I drag the image in, it is automatically placed on the layer 1 layer, and I'm going to rename this. So double click where it says layer 1, and I'm going to name that reference. Now, to prevent myself from editing this layer, I'm going to go ahead and lock the layer and create a new layer. I'm going to do my illustration on this new layer. So where should we start? I think I'm going to actually start with his mouth. So if you need to zoom in, you can grab the magnifying glass, the zoom tool over here, and the shortcut Z. So if you tap Z, you can draw out an area to zoom into, or you can click to zoom. And then we're going to be drawing with the pen tool. So press P for pen tool, or find it over here, right there. And we'll just go ahead and draw out a rough shape for his mouth area. And it doesn't have to be perfect. We can come back and fix this later. And what we want to do is get the basic shape with as few points as possible. Now what I'm going to do is actually have his mouth go behind his nose, and that's okay. We'll just use a layer to cover up the mouth later on. And I'm going to hide my reference layer to get an idea of what I just illustrated. And I think that's a pretty good start. What I'm going to do is select the stroke that I just drew. I double click to select all of it. And I'm going to go to Properties, and I'm going to thicken that up a little bit. Maybe 2 or 3 in my case. And then I want to use this color for my reference image. So I'm going to grab the Eyedropper tool, and the shortcut for that is I. I'm going to click on this color that I want to sample. And for me, Flash went ahead and automatically switched to my Paint Bucket tool, which was nice. But if yours didn't, you can select the Paint Bucket tool, shortcut K, and you can spill in some color on Homer's face here. Now, by hiding and showing this layer, we can kind of get an idea of where our mistakes are, and then we can go back and fix that. So I like to grab my subselection tool, that's shortcut A, and click on the points, and you can kind of see their Bezier control points. Okay, and one way to tell whether or not you're going to have a smooth curve is if your Bezier controls should be 180 degrees from each other. So basically a straight line, as we see here. And then for a nice smooth curve, we want the angle on both sides of this curve in relation to this line to be about the same. So I'm going to go ahead and grab these control points and kind of play with them until I get a curve that is smoother. And now I'm actually zoomed in too much. If you want to zoom back out to 100%, you can always double click on the magnifying glass and you go back to 100%. That's actually a better curve right there. Down here, we've got a couple problems with the curve. And you can actually move the points too. Snapping is kind of annoying. If you want to just nudge this point a little bit, what I like to do is select it and then use the arrow keys on the keyboard to actually move it little by little. And that's sometimes easier than trying to do so with the mouse. Now here's a great example of a curve that's not smooth. And we can tell that the angle between the curve and the control points is not the same on this side of the anchor point as it is on this side. This side has a really large angle relative to this really tiny angle over here. So I'm going to grab this and go ahead and even that out a little bit. Now sometimes that messes your curve up in a way that you don't want. So what you'll find is that after moving the control point, sometimes you actually have to move the anchor point itself. And it's a little bit of back and forth. Actually, that's not bad. I want to grab this point, move it down a little bit. And I actually like what I have here so far. So I want to draw some of the rest of the detail for his mouth. So I'm going to actually grab my selection tool and click to grab this fill. And I'm going to delete it and then unhide my reference. And I'm going to use this to draw some of this area of his mouth. Now, what I can do is there are several different tricks that we can use to help us with our illustration. I'm going to grab the line tool, and I'm going to basically draw a line from here to about here. Now, obviously, that doesn't look correct. But what we can do is we can grab the selection tool and click and drag this line to curve it, to bend it like so. And then we can compare that with the original reference and see that that's actually a pretty simple way of creating that line. And then with the selection tool, I can click on this little line and delete them. And let's see if we can use the same method to draw his tongue here. I'm going to grab a line, and I want it to cross the other line in the two places where the tongue looks like where it meets the side of his mouth. I'm going to call that pretty good. And grab my selection tool and bend that upwards. Notice that if we're drawing on the same layer, we're automatically cutting the line where the lines intersect each other, which is very helpful. So what I want to do now is spill in some color. So I'll go back to grabbing the eyedropper tool with eye, click on his mouth, drop in that skin color, and I'll sample the red and sample the black colors, and then zoom out, hide the reference, and take a look at what we have so far. That's pretty good. Next thing I want to do is draw his teeth. Now, I don't want to mess up the layer that I already have. I'm going to name this layer Mouth, and for now I want to lock it and create a new layer that I'll call Teeth. I'm going to hide the mouth layer and show our reference. Grab the pen tool And what I want to do is, this is going to seem really strange at first, but I think it'll work just fine. I'm going to put a point there, and then put a point between each tooth, and then finally a point about there. Now this looks really bizarre, but that's okay, we're going to fix it. I'm going to switch to my selection tool, that's V, and I'm going to use that same method to drag out a curve here for each tooth. Alright, I like that. And I'll use the eyedropper to sample the white color, and I'll spill the white in. And there are his teeth. Now, the problem is, obviously, that his teeth are in front of his lip. Okay, and we want his teeth to be in front of this back lip, but behind this top lip. So, we could split apart the mouth layer into multiple layers, but what I'm going to do is something I like to call the cookie cutter technique. I'm going to unlock the mouth layer, and I want to select just a line, okay? And I want all the lines. So I'm going to double click, and that'll select all the lines, and I'm going to hit Control C or Command C to copy just those lines. I'm going to lock the mouth layer and go back to the teeth layer. Now, what I'm going to do is actually paste these lines on this layer, but if I paste it, it's not going to paste it in the exact same place. So I'm going to right-click and say Paste in Place. Okay, and that'll paste at the exact same coordinates that we copied from. So I'm going to hide my mouth layer, and we can see this is the new teeth layer. What I can do is select, not double-click, but just single-click on these lines out here. And if I do that one line at a time, I can go through and delete all of the unnecessary lines. Until I have exactly the shape that I want. Don't forget yet to delete that extra fill as well. And there we go. We've got a teeth layer that sits on top of the mouth layer. But we actually used the lines from the mouth layer to cut the teeth shape exactly the way that we needed it. So the teeth actually look like they're behind this lip, when in actuality, that layer is in front of the mouth layer. They just line up perfectly. So I want to lock the teeth layer so that I don't mess that up. We've got a fantastic start here. If you're following along, I'd like to remind you that this would be a great time to save your project. If Flash crashes, which it sometimes does, you don't want to lose all of your progress. So I'm going to just save it to my desktop. You probably have a different location to save yours. Okay. So I'm going to zoom out and unhide my reference. And I think the next appropriate thing to draw would probably be his nose. So I'm going to hide his teeth layer, his mouth layer, and I'm going to create a new layer for his nose. I'll go ahead and name that nose now. And I will use the zoom tool to zoom in. And I'm going to, of course, use my pen tool to just draw the outline of that nose. And what I'm going to do is actually start it out over here. Okay, that's not really perfect, but I'm going to go back and fix that. And I am going to close this shape. Okay. It looks wrong because obviously the lines for his nose do not extend out this far, but we're going to fix that, of course, in just a minute. And one of the things I want to do is adjust this curve. I can do so with the selection tool. Usually you're better off using the that actually adds points. Not what I want to do. I should certainly make a point of pointing that out. If you use the selection tool to bend curves, it adds extra anchor points in, something that can actually be pretty negative. What I'll do is use my subselection tool to adjust the anchor points that I already have. So this is a challenging shape. I might need more anchor points. Okay, I think that's going to be pretty good. I can always come back later and fix it. Okay, so here's what we have so far. Obviously that curve is not smooth. It's a little better. I'm going to close this shape off, and I have to do that if I want to spill in some color here. So I'm going to unhide my reference, and I'll use the eyedropper tool to sample that yellow color, and then I'll spill it into the shape, hide the reference, and this is now what we have. Using my selection tool, V, I can select the extra lines over here now and delete them. I'm going to unhide my mouth, and I can see that I want the nose to end right about here where these two lines meet. I'll double check that with my reference real quick. Actually, it's supposed to look like one smooth curve. Let's see if I can kind of replicate that. Unhide the nose, unhide the mouth, and grab the selection tool. I'm going to try to line this curve up a little better. Wow. That was, ended up being pretty easy. So I'm going to zoom out, hide the reference, and that's what we have so far. Still doesn't look quite right, but it'll look better as we get further along. I'm going to lock the nose layer and create a layer for his right eye. His left, but our right. And the eye is pretty simple. We're going to use a circle. So select the oval tool, shortcut O. And I'm just going to select over here for my fill color is white. My stroke color should be black. And I'm going to draw out a big circle. Hold down Shift if you want a circle instead of an oval. And the size is about right. I'm going to double click on the fill to select the fill and the line, and that way I can just use the arrow keys to nudge everything into place. And I think that's just about perfect. I'm going to lock that layer, create a new layer, hide the eye layer, and call the new layer pupil. And I'll use the oval tool again. This time I'll use a fill of black, and I don't want a stroke color, so I'm going to come in here and click on this little button, white with a red line through it, and that'll give me no stroke. Then I'll draw out a circle about the size of his pupil. Use my selection tool, select it, and then I'll nudge it into place. Now, unhide my eye layer, hide my reference, zoom out. Not bad. Now for the second eye, we're going to do pretty much the same thing. His left eye, excuse me, his right, our left, is behind the nose. So I'm going to create a new layer behind the nose layer, and if your layer is above it, just go ahead and grab it and drag it below the nose layer. And what we can do is call this eye, and I'm going to call it eye dash left. And unlock the eye layer, the existing eye layer. We can actually call that eye right. And I'm going to select everything by double-clicking on the fill. Copy that. And select the eye left layer. Right-click and say paste in place. The left eye is now directly behind the right eye. So I'm just going to actually hold down Shift and nudge the eye by using the arrow keys. And right about there is perfect. I'm going to hide and show the layer. And we can see that the left eye is actually smaller than the right. So what I'm going to do is select everything there. And I want to scale that down. I can use the free transform tool, that's shortcut Q. And I'm going to hold down Shift to scale proportionally. And I'm just going to scale it down a little bit. And then use the arrow keys to nudge it back into position. Okay, perfect. Next thing to do is to create another pupil. So I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to call it pupil-left. And I'm going to unlock the other pupil layer. I'm going to rename that pupil-right. And I'll copy that pupil, select it, Control-C, go select the pupil left layer, right-click, say paste in place, and then use my arrow keys to nudge that pupil over. And something like that looks perfect. Now we're getting to have a lot of layers. One of the things we can do is start using folders, and I will create a folder and I'll call this folder Eyes, and I'll take my two pupil layers. Well, I can't do that, the nose is in there too. Yeah, I'll just create a layer called Illustration, and I'll put all of my illustration layers into that folder. And then now I can hide and show the folder and see the difference between my illustration and the reference image. Obviously the pupils don't line up quite right, and I can fix that. I can unlock the pupil left layer and drag it over closer to where my reference image has it. And you know, in this case I don't think it has to be perfect because I think it still looks just fine the way it is. Okay. I think next what we're going to do is draw the basic outline of his head. So I'm going to lock all of my layers. I'm going to create a new layer, and I want this new layer to be behind all of my other layers. I'm going to call it Head, and what I want to do is hide all of my existing layers. I want to make sure I can see my reference layer, and the only layer that should be unlocked is the head layer. And with the pen tool, that's shortcut P, we'll just draw an outline that goes all the way around his head. And this doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to come back, of course, and add some more accurate curves to the segments later on. The front of his head is obscured by features we've already drawn, so it doesn't really matter what we make his head look like right there. For the time being, what I'm going to do is actually not worry about the curve at all, and just put in some points using completely straight lines. Okay, now obviously that isn't correct, but what we can do now is go in and add some better curve here. What I don't want to do is I don't want to use my selection tool to bend these, because you know what that'll do is it'll add more anchor points in, and it won't make the points where we have Bezier curves, it won't make those completely smooth, and I want them to be completely smooth. So what I can do is, first of all, I'm going to switch to my subselection tool. I'm going to select this shape so I can see all of the existing anchor points, and then I want to grab the Convert Anchor Point tool. Okay, that's under the pen tool, and we can use shortcut C to get at that. The Convert Anchor Point tool allows us to convert these anchor points from this linear interpolation that we see right here, linear meaning straight lines, to Bezier curves. So I'm going to click on this point to drag out a couple Bezier control points. Okay, and it doesn't have to be accurate, because what we're going to do is do this to each anchor point. And for each anchor point we do it on, it tends to affect its neighboring anchor points. So it's going to require a lot of trial and error. Now actually, what I'm going to do is grab this anchor point and hide it behind his ear, which we have yet to draw. And because we won't actually see that part of the curve, it doesn't matter if it's completely smooth. So that'll allow me to actually save time, grab the selection tool, and just bend this line. And I can use the selection tool to also move that anchor point if I want to move it a little bit. Although, it might make more sense just to grab it with the subselection tool and nudge it with the arrow keys. And like I said, that actually made the line drift further from his head right here. So it'll require a lot of trial and error. Just grabbing this, nudging it. Now I want the color of his head to match the color I already used for the eye. And just to ensure that, what I'm going to do is unhide, the nose. And I'm going to unhide the nose layer, use the eyedropper tool, shortcut I, to sample that color, and then spill it into the head. I'm going to hide the reference, and this looks really bizarre. But as I unhide the layers I've already drawn, we can see that it's actually not too bad. Now his head isn't perfectly smooth, but it's not bad. We've got a couple more features to add, so I'll continue with those. I'm going to go ahead and do his hair next. I'm going to create a layer. I'm going to hide my existing layers. And I'll call this layer hair. And I might actually do each piece of hair independently. So I'm going to call this hair 1. I'm going to go ahead and make sure I have a black stroke and no fill. I'll grab the oval tool, shortcut O, and I'll basically draw out a circle about the size, or, with a curve that matches the size of his hair. I'll scale that up a little bit. And it's not perfect, but it doesn't need to be. Now we can see that the hair goes behind his head in the back and then in front of his head up here. What I'm going to do is unhide my head layer and hide my reference real quick. I'm going to use a line here to basically do the cookie cutter technique. I'm going to cut this shape in half with a line, select the bottom half, delete it, and then select the pieces of line that are left over and delete those. And I'm going to hide my head and show the reference, and I can see that obviously got to cut back a little bit more here. I'll do that with the selection tool. And that's what we're left with. Not bad. I'm going to copy it, create a new layer called Hair 2, lock Hair 1, hide Hair 1, paste in place on Hair 2, and I'm just going to go ahead and drag it over here. And I might need to scale it down a little bit. And just use show the head, hide the reference, use the cookie cutter technique with the line tool to cut the circle right there. Use the selection tool V to cut away the extra stuff. Zoom out real quick. Unhide all my layers, and that's not bad. Lock the hair layers. Okay, next we have an ear and some sideburns to work on. Unhide the reference, hide all my existing layers. I'm going to create a layer, I'll call it sideburn, and that's pretty easy. I'm just going to use the line tool, draw out some line segments, and oops, I'll let the lines intersect each other, and then I'll just delete the excess. Now, I actually missed the mark, and it might be hard to see, but I'm going to double click to select everything and just change the color real quick so that you can see. This is a nice technique when you're using a reference image to change the color of what you're drawing so that you can more easily see what you're working on. I'm going to delete the extra stuff hanging off the ends first real quick. And now we can actually see that I did not hit the reference art perfectly. Not that you always have to, but I'm going to use the subselection tool to select these anchor points, and I can just move these anchor points independently until they're lined up the way they should be. Okay, perfect. I'm going to select that with a double click and then change the color back to black. Lock the sideburns layer. Next up, we've got a layer for the ear. So I'm going to create a new layer, call it ear, and I'll start with a circle. Now, we've got some shadow on his face. We're going to get to that in a little bit. For now, I'll just let the ear be the same color as his head. Although before I drop that color in, I'm going to go ahead and draw this little feature inside his ear. This is pretty simple to do. I'm going to basically use the line tool to draw a straight line, and then I'll use the selection tool to bend it, and then I'll do the exact same thing again. There we go. I'll use the paint bucket tool, K, to spill in the head color. And then I want to use the cookie cutter technique to basically cut the side of the ear so it's not a circle like this. But I can't really see where to cut it because my reference art is behind my existing art. One of the things you can do is these little buttons over here by your layers. You've got a button for layer visibility, a button to lock the layer, and then you've got this third button. It's a color swatch, but if you click on it, it will turn the layer into outline mode, where you can basically see through the artwork but still see the outlines, and that's really helpful. So I'm going to grab the line tool, and with that layer still selected, I can basically cut the side of the ear, turn off outline mode, and I can see where I cut it. Use my selection tool to grab the extra part of the ear and delete it. Oops. Like so. Now I'm going to unhide all my layers, hide my reference layer, and admire my work. That's pretty good. I'm not going to worry about his shirt or the rest of his body, but there is still one more thing I want to do here. And if your artwork is, you know, if your reference artwork is shaded, then you want your artwork to be shaded as well. You know, the Simpsons style is typically kind of flat. It doesn't have a lot of shading, so I could get away with it the way it is now. but I want to take it a step further. If I look at my reference art, I can see that there is some shading on his head. There's some shading on his lips here, and there's also some shading on the side of his head. So how are we going to accomplish that? Well, it's actually not too hard. What I'm going to do is find my head layer, and I'm going to create a new layer just above it. And I'm going to call that layer head-shadow. Then I'm going to unlock the head layer and select the fill. I don't need the strokes. Don't select the strokes, just the fill. And I'm going to copy that. And then I'm going to, in the head shadow layer, right-click and say paste in place. Now, I'm going to hide my reference real quick. What I've done is now I have a fill over top of my other fill and my other stroke. And I'm going to change this to be the shadow shape. To do that, I'm going to hide all of my other layers. Okay. And I'm going to show my reference art. And I'm going to switch to outline mode on the shadow. And I basically want to do some sort of cookie cutting technique to make it, to change the shape of the shadow so that it just overlays where the shadow is on my reference art. To do that, I'm just going to grab the line tool and I'm going to draw a big line through it. Turn off outline mode and delete this other half. Now I'm going to delete the line, double click on the line, delete it. And I'll switch back to outline mode here. And now I want to curve the side of the shadow so that it matches. And to do that, I'm going to need some more anchor points in there. So under the pen tool, there is the add anchor point tool. On your keyboard, it is the plus sign next to the backspace button. And I'm just going to click to add a couple points. 1, 2, and that's probably all I really need. And with the subselection tool, I'm going to move these to kind of sit, right on the curve. Or rather, right in the centers of curves. Now, I can switch to my Convert Anchor Point tool, that's C, and turn this into a smooth curve. And I might have to move these as I do that. This one needs to be moved down a little bit. I'll nudge it down and then adjust the curve so that it's smooth. And I'm going to call that good. I'm going to, in my timeline, turn off outlines. And the next step here would be to take this yellow shadow and make it black. Okay, just go straight black. I have to select it, make it straight black. Well, cool. Now, I want to make it somewhat transparent. Okay, because black, it's too dark. So if I show all of my layers here, that's too dark of a shadow, obviously. So I'm going to select that shape, and in my color panel, you'll notice that I can create colors with hue, saturation, brightness, red, green, blue, and then there's also A for alpha. Right now it's 100%. It's 100% opaque. So I'm going to drag that down to maybe somewhere closer to 30%. And that's pretty close to my reference art. I'm going to go a little more subtle, though. So I'm going to select it and make it maybe 20%. Great. Good. Now, obviously the ear, we need to do the same thing. So I'm going to lock the head shadow layer, find the ear layer, create a new layer above it, call it ear-shadow. I'm going to unlock the ear layer, copy the fill, paste it in place, right-click, paste in place on the ear shadow layer. I'm going to make it black, And I want to check my reference art, of course. See that there's just a little bit here that needs to be showing. I'm going to select this and switch to outline mode. And I'm going to use a line to cut off a chunk of this circle here. Wow, I can't see it. It's all black. I'm going to double click the line to make that line blue. And I guess I could do this in outline mode. Bend it. Turn off outline mode. Delete the extra fill and then delete the lines. I can now show all of my artwork. Select this fill. And then in my color panel, go ahead and make alpha 20%, just like we did with the side of the head. I'm going to zoom out, and we can see that that actually looks fantastic. One more left to do, and that is the shadow on the side of his mouth. So I'm going to lock the unlocked layers. I want to have all of my layers locked except for the layers that I'm currently working with. It's a great rule of thumb. So I'm going to select the mouth layer, put a new layer above it called mouth-shadow. Unlock the mouth layer, select just the fill, copy, lock the mouth layer, go to mouth shadow, right click and say paste in place. And I'm going to hide all of my layers and then unhide just the mouth shadow layer. Switch to outline view. And I gotta use the cookie cutter technique here. Possibly easier said than done. I'm going to first fill in this hole right here. So I'll use the eyedropper to select that color, fill in that hole, and then use the cookie cutter technique to cut from down here to up here. Switch to the selection tool and bend this. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. And then turn off outline mode, delete this extra shape, delete the extra line here. Select our shadow, make it black, and then make its alpha 20%. Now, I'm going to hide my reference and show all of my layers. And there is my completed Homer Simpson head. So hopefully this tutorial was helpful in introducing you to the illustration tools inside of Flash. Thanks for watching.